All right, everyone. Hello and welcome into our latest Kirk Cousins discussion. These always go so well and everybody always enjoys them, myself not included. But today I felt like I would go over this because it feels like it's going to be prominent over the next 5 weeks. And one of the questions that I get asked with some frequency on this channel is what should the Minnesota Vikings do with Kirk Cousins in the quarterback position beyond the 2021 season? One of the observations that I've made, having spent too much time on Minnesota Vikings social media, go figure, is that Kirk Cousins' biggest defenders will not hesitate to remind you of the dark ages that came before Kirk Cousins started playing football for the Vikings. They bring up Tarvaris Jackson, they bring up Christian Ponder, Sam Bradford, even Teddy Bridgewater to an extent, all to remind us of what used to be of the quarterback position and the production that we got out of it before the arrival of Kirk Cousins, and we should all be grateful for the production that Kirk Cousins currently gives us at the most important position in arguably all of sports. So, having said all of that, what I want to accomplish today is sort of to explore the idea of what it would be like in the post Kirk Cousins era. And to do that, I'm going to reference the Washington football team throughout this video because they are the only other team that Kirk Cousins has played for, and it has been 4 years since he has been with that team. So it was kind of interesting to do this side-by-side comparison where you have 4 years of the Vikings with Kirk Cousins and 4 years of the Washington football team without Kirk Cousins. Are his defenders accurate? Is it going to be the dark ages all over again? And it kind of depends on who you ask because there's some complexity and nuance to this entire thing, but it was just interesting to sort of do the side-by-side comparison, and I'm going to share that with you now. Before I get into that comparison, I do want to cover sort of a kind of answer to the offseason approach. What should they do with Kirk Cousins when 2021 is concluded? You know, right now they sit at 5-7, still technically alive in the playoff race, but I mean, come on, nobody's really taking the Vikings playoff chances seriously after losing to Detroit. So let's just, throw that out the window. So there's three options, I think, in my opinion, that the Minnesota Vikings will decide how they want to handle Kirk Cousins beyond this year. Option number one is obviously to extend him to a new contract, bring the salary cap hit next year down from that $45 million current cap hit that it currently is, because I think that current cap hit is unacceptable if they intend to put enough talent around him to make this thing actually work and not double down on just buying spare parts like they did this previous offseason. Maybe actually get him a really good right guard. Who knows? Maybe that would be in the cards if they actually were able to save some money. So that is option number one. Option number two is to, of course, trade him to a team that really wants a quarterback. I'm sure a lot of teams out there would be very happy to have his talent and services because, disclaimer, he is a good quarterback. This isn't me trying to bash him. He's a good quarterback who has some pretty good talent and knows what he's doing. He just happens to make a lot of mistakes when it's unwarranted, and we're very frustrated with the lack of return on investment. So some other team out there may actually want him in a trade, but I'm not really going to go in depth on that because it would be very complicated given the whole contract, salary cap situation surrounding it all. But that is an option on the table. Option number three is to do nothing and just leave him in as the starter, play out the last year of his contract on that massive cap hit, and maybe draft a rookie quarterback in the first round. They currently hold the 10th overall selection in the 2022 NFL draft. That's a prime spot to maybe get Matt Corral from Ole Miss or Malik Willis, Kenny Pickett, whoever your flavor of the month is. And the idea here for this third option is to have him play out the final year of his contract, have him siphon up all of that cap space where they can't put a decent team around him, and it's sink or swim for Kirk Cousins in the final year of his contract while they have the rookie quarterback in waiting as the backup, or maybe they even do the Kellen Mond approach, which they did this year with Kellen Mond. But I think if you're taking a quarterback in the first round, you're probably not having him be inactive every week as they have been doing with Kellen Mond this entire season. So those are kind of the ideas or the options that the Vikings could do at the end of the year. I'm really not in favor of the first two. I actually, you'd be basically punting the 2022 season if you did this, but maybe that's not a bad idea considering a rebuild is unlikely to occur in a 1-year time span. You might need 2 or 3. So I digress on that. Those are the options. Argue amongst yourselves in the comments with which one you would prefer. Moving on to the side-by-side comparison with the Minnesota Vikings having had Kirk Cousins for 4 years and the Washington football team currently in year 4 of the post-Kirk Cousins era. How has everything transpired? So I'm going to put a couple of graphics on the screen as we finish out this video. The first one is the record comparison for the last 4 years, starting with 2018, the Minnesota Vikings' first year with Kirk Cousins went 8-7-1, missed the playoffs. Washington football team goes 7-9, misses the playoffs. Not much of a difference. Year number 2, 2019, things come together for the Vikings. Things fall apart for the Washington football team. 10-6 for the Vikings in a playoff appearance. Washington football team goes 3-13, earns the first overall pick, or I think it was the second overall pick in the draft where they got Chase Young. That's right. Joe Burrow went 1 overall. In 2020, the Vikings go 7-9. Things don't go very well during the COVID era. For the Washington football team, they get kind of lucky with a 7-9 record because they get into the playoffs having played in a piss-poor division. That is not the case this year. The Cowboys are actually good. 2021, the Minnesota Vikings so far are 5-7, and it looks like their playoff hopes are all but destroyed. They have a 25% chance to make the playoffs. The Washington football team currently holds the 7th seed in the playoffs. At a 6-6 record, they are currently on a 4-game winning streak. So the tables have turned. I don't know how to do the Office quote, so I'm not even going to try. So that's 1 playoff appearance per team over the last 4 years. Kirk Cousins with one team and not with the other. Total record for the Minnesota Vikings over the last 4 years up until this point is 30-29-1. The Washington football team have gone 23-37. So both teams have played 60 games since the beginning of 2018. And all 60 games for Kirk Cousins have come with the Minnesota Vikings. So we are looking at about a 7-win difference. And that is not, in my opinion, the greatest return on investment over the course of 4 years, where we have only won 7 more games than the Washington football team have without Kirk Cousins. $84 million guaranteed contract in the beginning, over the course of 3 years. If Kirk Cousins is on the roster, I believe the second or third day of the new league year for 2022, his current contract extension becomes fully guaranteed, and he will tap out at the end of the contract, having made $97 million over 5 years with the Minnesota Vikings. And that, in my opinion, is just highway robbery. So that's my biggest frustration with him, is the lack of return on investment. And it appears that the Washington football team hasn't fared really any worse or better without him. The results seem to be rather similar, even though I would argue the comparison itself, and I'm sort of, knocking my own experiment here, the Washington football team are one of the more poorly run franchises with an owner that should be strapped to an Acme rocket and launched into the sun for all of his grievances that he's managed to do with his team in his history as owner of the Washington football team. So just a couple of asides there real quick. Now let's move on to a section where we dissect the quarterbacks that have played for the Washington football team since 2018. Because remember, one of the biggest arguments for the Kirk Cousins defenders is that when Kirk Cousins is gone, whether it's by trade or just being let go at the end of the year, or maybe he does sign the extension and then retires at 38, who knows, eventually he's not going to be on this team. It's going to happen at some point. Father Time is undefeated. But they all say that we are going to return to the dark ages because there is nothing better coming up in the future post Kirk Cousins. But we're going to go back to Tarvaris Jackson and Christian Ponder. They are dead set on history repeating itself. So how have things worked out for the Washington football team? Well, it's been kind of interesting, and it hasn't been great. So for the Washington football team, they start off with Alex Smith, trading for him in 2018. He goes I can't read my own handwriting here. 205 for 328, 62 completion percentage, 2,180 yards, 10 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. He starts out his career with the Washington football team at 6-4 before he has the horrific leg injury that sidelines him for the next season and a half. Josh Johnson takes over for the rest of the year. You get a couple starts from Colt McCoy, 1 start for Mark Sanchez. Really, after the leg injury for Alex Smith, things just went downhill for the Washington football team for the next couple of seasons leading up to this year. So let's jump to 2019. They sign Case Keenum. He doesn't work out in Denver after the Minneapolis Miracle. Case Keenum comes in. He goes 1 for 60, 247, 64 completion percentage, 1,676 yards, 11 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. Not really a terrible stat line, but they go 1-7 with him as the starter. So, you kind of just look at those stats and you're like, well, maybe it's not his fault, right? Throwing shade here. This was also the year that they drafted Dwayne Haskins out of Ohio State in the first round with the 15th overall selection. Dan Snyder kind of forced this one, if you will, and I am totally against owners forcing front offices to make decisions that they probably don't want to make. And hindsight is 2020. They probably shouldn't have drafted Dwayne Haskins where they did, and you could say that about a lot of draft picks. It is a full-fledged crapshoot. Dwayne Haskins in 2019 goes 119 for 203. 58% completion percentage, 1,365 yards, 7 touchdowns, 7 picks. They go 2-5 with Haskins as the starter. Colt McCoy gets 1 start in 2019. They win a total of 3 games. So in 2020, the rebuild is on. They try year 2 of Dwayne Haskins at quarterback. 148 out of 241 passes, 61% completed. 1,439 yards, 5 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. They go 1-5 with him as the starter. That experiment is over. He is no longer with the team. Ron Rivera, in his first season as a coach, brings over Kyle Allen. Had some success with the Panthers. Does not translate well to the new team. Goes 60 for 87, 69 completion percentage. Nice. 610 yards, 4 touchdowns, 1 pick. He goes 1-3 as a starter. Alex Smith comes back. No reason. We had no reason after his injury to believe that he would ever play football again. Alex Smith comes back in 2020, 160 completions on 252 attempts, 66% completion percentage, 1,582 yards, 6 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. Not very good stats, but they go 5-1 with him as the starter. Pretty incredible. And what's also incredible, really, is if you span out the course of Alex Smith's career over those 2 seasons, the first half of 2018, the second half of 2020, the guy's 11-5 as a starter with the Washington football team. The Washington football team is 11-5 when they have Alex Smith as a quarterback. That's pretty interesting. So maybe had he stayed healthy, we'd be writing a different story about this franchise over the past couple of seasons. Then we jump ahead to this year. They signed journeyman Ryan Fitzpatrick to take over the starting duties at the quarterback position because they were really out of position to draft another quarterback in the first round. So they decided, what the hell, let's punt the season and see what happens. He is injured the first week of the year. He is lost for the season. So in comes Taylor Heinicke, the guy that had the impressive playoff game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers last year. And you know what? He's done pretty damn well for himself, being a rather undersized, diminutive quarterback that he is. With a little bit more ability to scramble. He's 267 for 393, 67 completion percentage, 2,809 yards so far this season, 18 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, pretty respectable stats. 6-5 as a starter this year. As I said, they are on a 4-game winning streak. They are currently in the playoff hunt with the 7th seed locked up. NFC is pretty bad this year, so you can sneak into the playoffs with a not so good record. And for all the people that love passer rating stats, Kirk Cousins defenders, Taylor Heinicke has a 92 passer rating so far this year, which is not too shabby. So, bottom line, it looks like the Washington football team is going through quarterbacks faster than it can count. And that is to be expected. You are going to have those issues when you do not have an Aaron Rodgers or a Tom Brady or a Patrick Mahomes or a Kirk Cousins who is good enough. And thank God he is, what's the word I'm looking for? Durable enough to not get injured and miss significant time because of a said injury. So he is good in that regard. So ultimately, you take a look at the Washington football team over the last 4 years. Have they had a carousel at the quarterback position? Yes. Did they miss on a first-round draft pick? Yes. I would argue that Dan Snyder is a terrible owner. It is a poorly run franchise. So maybe they're actually lucky that they're where they at, all things considered. But they have gone through a number of quarterbacks. Obviously, Taylor Heinicke is not going to be the franchise quarterback going forward past this year. I believe that they will try to make another move, and they will be on starting quarterback number 6. I don't count Josh Johnson and Mark Sanchez and Colt McCoy because those were just emergency starts for a team that was just super down on its luck, which, as I've said, injuries are not unique to your favorite team. They happen to everybody. So that's where we're at. I believe ultimately that, the Minnesota Vikings, having only won 7 more games in these last 60 games over these last 4 years with Kirk Cousins and the salary cap that he has, compared to the Washington football team that has won 7 less games with a carousel of quarterbacks, it seems like the argument is moot. Yes, wins are not a quarterback stat. I completely agree with that. The same way that I don't believe that championships and rings are an individual stat. Those are won by teams. The same way a game is won by a team. But it just says something to the ability of a team to be successful, depending on who the signal caller is. So I will leave it at that. Do with this information what you will. But in my opinion, it seems like, given this not so scientific experiment, that maybe, yes, we will go through some hardships at the position trying to find the next guy. And but ultimately, even if we're doing that, it seems like the results may not be that similar, because I give the Vikings credit for being a well-run organization compared to the Washington football team. So maybe we'll actually be better off. Maybe it's not going to be so scary. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.